My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I am 73 years old. For most of my life, I believed that if you raised your children with love, sacrifice, and patience, they would grow into people who valued those things. I spent 45 years proving that belief. I worked as a librarian in a quiet town where most people knew each other by name. It wasn't a glamorous career, but it was honest work. Every paycheck went toward building a stable life for my family. My husband, Robert, passed away 12 years ago after a sudden heart attack. Losing him felt like someone had pulled the foundation out from under my life. But I still had my children, Daniel, Laura, and Michael. Or at least I thought I did. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I am 73 years old. For most of my life, I believed that if you raised your children with love, sacrifice, and patience, they would grow into people who valued those things. I spent 45 years proving that belief. I worked as a librarian in a quiet town where most people knew each other by name. It wasn't a glamorous career, but it was honest work. Every paycheck went toward building a stable life for my family. My husband, Robert, passed away 12 years ago after a sudden heart attack. Losing him felt like someone had pulled the foundation out from under my life. But I still had my children, Daniel, Laura, and Michael. Or at least I thought I did. For the first few years after Robert died, things were normal enough. The children visited on holidays. Sometimes they'd call to check in. But slowly, something began to change. The first sign came in small comments. "Mom, did you forget what day it is?" Daniel asked once with a chuckle. Laura once said, "You already told me that story earlier, Mom." At first, I laughed it off. Everyone forgets things sometimes. But then the comments became conversations, and the conversations became concerns. One afternoon, Laura sat across from me at the kitchen table, stirring her coffee without drinking it. "Mom," she said carefully, "we've been worried about you." "About what?" I asked. "Your memory." I blinked. "My memory is fine." She exchanged a glance with Daniel, who had just walked in. "Mom," he said gently, "you forgot Michael's birthday last month." "I sent him a card." "You sent it 2 weeks late." I opened my mouth to argue, but then I stopped. Something about the way they were watching me made a quiet alarm ring in my mind. Not concern, evaluation, like they were studying me, testing me. I brushed it off at the time, but over the following months, the pattern repeated again and again. Every small mistake became evidence. Every forgotten detail became a discussion. Soon, the word forgetful was being used more often than my name. Then one evening, I walked into the living room and heard something that changed everything. My children didn't know I was standing in the hallway. Daniel was speaking. "If this keeps going the way it is, we'll have to take control before she loses everything." Laura responded quietly. "Maybe we should talk to a lawyer about power of attorney." Michael added something that made my stomach drop. "Better sooner than later, otherwise she might change the will." That was the moment the truth settled over me like cold rain. They weren't worried about my memory. They were worried about my money. And for the first time in my life, I realized my children were planning something behind my back. I went back to my room that night and didn't sleep. I replayed every conversation, every comment, every strange look from the past year. And suddenly, everything made sense. They weren't observing a decline. They were building a case. If they could convince people I was mentally incompetent, they could take legal control of my finances, my house, my savings, everything Robert and I had spent a lifetime building. I should have confronted them immediately, but something inside me told me not to. Instead, I decided to do something else. I decided to let them believe it. The next time Daniel mentioned my memory, I frowned slightly and said, "Maybe you're right. I have been forgetting things." Laura looked relieved. Michael looked interested. And from that moment on, I played the role they expected. If they asked about a bill, I said I couldn't remember paying it. If they mentioned a date, I pretended to be unsure. Sometimes I repeated stories. Sometimes I asked the same question twice. Each time, I watched their reactions, and what I saw slowly broke my heart. Concern disappeared. Excitement replaced it. They started visiting more often, not to spend time with me, but to ask about documents, bank accounts, insurance papers, my will. Laura once casually asked, "Mom, where do you keep your financial records?" I smiled vaguely. "Oh, somewhere safe, I think." They thought I was fading, but behind that performance, I was watching everything, and more importantly, I was documenting everything. I bought a small recorder and kept it in my pocket during their visits. I wrote down dates and conversations in a notebook. I contacted an old friend, a lawyer named Thomas Green, and told him everything. He listened quietly for nearly an hour. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said something that gave me both comfort and determination. "Eleanor, if what you're saying is true, your children are attempting financial exploitation. What should I do?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "Let them continue." That was the beginning of a plan. Over the next 6 months, my children grew bolder. Daniel began asking me to sign documents. Laura suggested selling my house and moving me into a smaller place. Michael once tried to convince me that I had forgotten to pay several bills that I knew had already been paid. Every attempt, every lie, every manipulation was recorded. And when they finally filed paperwork claiming I was mentally incompetent, they thought they had already won. But they forgot one important detail. I had been preparing too. The day of the court hearing arrived on a bright Monday morning. My children sat confidently on one side of the courtroom. They looked calm, certain, almost smug. Their lawyer argued that I was suffering from memory loss and could no longer manage my finances. They presented examples, stories, small mistakes taken out of context. Then the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you wish to respond?" I slowly stood up. For a moment, my children looked satisfied. They expected confusion, weakness, proof of their claims. Instead, I smiled. "Yes, Your Honor, I would like to respond." Then I turned to my lawyer. "Mr. Green, please play the recordings." One by one, the courtroom filled with the voices of my children, their plans, their discussions about controlling my money, their jokes about how easy it was to make me look forgetful. The confidence on their faces disappeared. Shock replaced it. Then panic. By the time the recordings ended, the courtroom was silent. The judge removed his glasses slowly. Then he looked directly at my children. "I believe I've heard enough." That day, the case was dismissed. But that wasn't the end, because after that hearing, I did something else. I changed my will. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. My children had shown me exactly who they were. And sometimes the most painful truths are also the most necessary ones. Because the day I walked out of that courtroom, I wasn't the forgetful old woman they thought I was. I was a mother who had finally stopped ignoring the truth. And in the end, justice didn't come from revenge. It came from seeing people clearly for the first time.